But it's been a while. We've been paying attention to the Gaza conflict, obviously, because it's pretty crazy. A lot of people refer to this as a war. I don't know if it's necessarily fair to even call it a war, as it is a slaughter of a captive population. And the reason I would say that is you don't really see a whole bunch of Hamas, firefights and back and forths. Now, I understand that you did see that in the beginning of the conflict, and in that case, I would say that yeah, that's a war. But if you're just going over top and bombarding a place, I don't know if that's necessarily a war per se. What would be your 2 cents on that discussion?
Yeah, so technically this is a war. There's a definition of there's an academic definition of a war. In my previous life, I was an academic, and if you have over a certain amount of people killed on both sides over a year, it's a war. Combatants, and there's been enough of those for sure on both those years for this to be a war. But a war is not the main thing that's going on. Is how I would put it. The main thing that's going on is genocide and ethnic cleansing and just a
That's kind of where I go to the captive slaughter game, where it's just kind of like it seems to me that like even if there isn't a target, you're still going to kill, which tells me that it's not really about a conflict between two armed groups per se. It's a conflict between an armed group and a population as a
That's right.
whole.
Which is not a conflict because the population
That's kind of my point, yeah.
can't do anything.
Like, I'm sure, like, this is kind of the thing, and I know it's not a direct one-to-one comparison, but when you saw, like, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, like, those people, in a lot of cases, weren't just, they were civilians. They were just regular people that were like, nah, I'm fucking up some Germans. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if you're slaughtering a people, if you're treating a people, you know, to a certain level of oppression, and I would say that raining bombs on them would be a certain level of oppression, then, even if they're not necessarily Hamas and you roll through there, they're probably going to shoot at you. And I think that's something that's a little bit weird about, like, call it a Western mindset or Eurocentric mindset, or it's something I've kind of talked about with my friends before, where it was just like, people will be like, well, they shot at this guy or they threw a rock at this guy. And I was like, I don't know about you, but I live in the United States of America, and if I walked out and there was on the corner, there were six guys speaking Russian to each other with guns that had been, had invaded my country, I'd throw rocks at them, I'd shoot at them, and I'd probably scream something about Jesus while I did it.
Interesting use of Jesus, but
But no, I'm making the point that like a lot of people fall back on their religion. They fall back on a lot of these things. So it's
I
like
understand.
this stuff is a lot more political than people think it is.
Yeah. But that's already getting at the roots of the conflict, which are convoluted and complex. But I think even when you end up at the point of laws of war, international law, that doesn't really matter how you got there. It doesn't matter if the war is justified. It doesn't matter if there's a justified occupation or any of that. What matters is how you behave once you're there. And that's very important because a lot of people, as you see, who don't understand international law or do and pretend not to, talk about whether it's a justified response to October 7th or so on and so forth. That's not even relevant. What's relevant is how you act while you're in it. There's two kinds of international law. There's jus ad bellum and jus in bellum. There's the law of war, of entering war, starting a war, just war, and then there's the war of how a war proceeds, the law of how a war proceeds. And the two are not connected. No matter what the law is regarding the start of the war, in the war you have to obey international law. And
Yeah.
it is
Two wrongs don't make a right type thing, basically. Even if they start it horrifically, you can't respond horrifically.
That's right. And one of the major, there's two reasons for that. They're both pretty obvious. One is that it's very hard to tell who's at fault for starting a war in most cases.
Oh yeah.
And so what are you going to do? Say, how are you going to determine that? And the others, you don't want to give anyone an excuse to commit war crimes. And
And then also sometimes it's a little bit more mutual than people like play things up to be, if that makes sense.
just about every
You
war
know
in
what I mean?
history.
Like it's like you look at like this is like, well, who started this? And I was like, oh no, man, it was kind of a back and forth for a little while beforehand. Like even like if you go and you look at like Russia, Ukraine, and the, you know, the issues they were having with Crimea and stuff like that. Like people will be like, this started in 2023, and I'm like, no, dude, this has been going on since well before 2014. You know, so
In every
it's
war, you can make a very strong case, and there are people who are paid to do this, that one side is innocent and one side is
well, and also the game of when you start the timeline really plays the game. And you see that a lot with, well, what about October 7th? Well, what about October 7th is like, we're not going to talk about any history 6th and behind. We're going to start at October 7th because that's when we were all birthed into the world and that's when everything started. You know what I mean? So it's kind of an interesting thing where to me, that's why like I think the fairest way to actually tell the story is to go back to 1890 and start at the actual, you know, evolution of Zionism itself, why it exists in and of itself. What is the actual purpose for it? Why do so many people cling to this idea? Why do so many Jews feel like it's so necessary to have this homeland? Because that's something that if you're against it, even if you're against it, you're going to have to contend with. It's like you do realize that it wasn't just the Holocaust. There was a lead up with all these pogroms where people were getting slaughtered left and right. And that's something that you'd have to grapple with before you just completely throw this out of the like it wasn't just a one-off event. It was numerous events across numerous countries, so it just kind of has this nowhere is safe feel. And like I said, is like, but that's part of the reason why I almost have this little bit of an animosity towards Zionists, because it's like, how do you not understand the Palestinian plight? How do you not understand the want to return? How do you not understand, you know what I mean? All of these things, because it's the same thing. I've been bounced around. I went to Jordan, they killed me. I went to Egypt, they killed me. In Israel, they killed me. Like, where am I going to go? I have nowhere to go. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's such a similar. I mean, I know it's a condensed history. It's not as long. It's not as story, but it's like it seems like a plight that should be easily identified with,
Well,
given the
no,
history.
no
Does
one
that
can
make any
understand.
sense?
Of course, it makes sense. No one can understand the right of return better than Zionists. That's one of the reasons they're so against it. If you're gone from a land for 2,000 years and you yearn to return, let's say you take that story at face value. Uh, it's easy to understand wanting to return after one generation, right? But they act as if it's some kind of complete anomaly, and no other refugees are treated this way. But that's what the entire movement is based on. It's based on the fact that you have a home, you were driven out of it, and you want to return to it. Yeah, that's one of these things where you conveniently pretend not to understand. It's not like they genuinely don't understand. I grew up in the Zionist movement. Honestly, I don't think I'm a outlier saying that I always completely understood what they wanted and why they wanted it. I thought it was more than anything else, I thought it was not practical, and I thought it was best to try to solve it on a two-state solution basis. But yeah, it's very very easy to understand, especially for Jews. But it's easy for everyone to
Yeah, like I
understand.
said, I have neither in my history, but like I don't know, I have this weird thing about like this ancestral bias. Me and you have talked about it before, where it's just like I don't know, that's all my people. When I read about the pogroms, I'm like, bro, if that happened to me, I get how you would feel this way. And then when I read about the Nakba, I literally go, well, dude, if that happened to me, I get how you'd feel that way. I don't know why we don't just have basic empathy and quit assuming that just because someone doesn't have the right genetics, they can't understand what you went through. Because at the end of the day, it's not like you yourself went through it, it's your family, and you're hearing history the same as I'm hearing history.
Yeah, But
You know what I mean? And if I have enough empathy, I'm having the same empathy that you have. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little wrong on that, but I don't know. If I hear history about Europeans and history about Africans, I don't look at it and go, well, that seems more like that's my people or my family, or I don't identify with one or the other more.
that's rare. Yeah. Uh, I'm getting there. It took me a long time to get there. But no, but lack of empathy for the other side is something that is it's constructed. A lot of it is constructed. You have to keep explaining why those other people are,
But it's
almost
also what makes war possible, and it's also part of the reason why I'm so against it and I'm so about it. Like, I'm sure you've seen these studies before, but there's been numerous studies of like troops where they'll take these people and they'll put them through the marksmanship training like anyone does, and like they're hitting bullseye, 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 bullseye. You put them out in the field and they go out into war and they miss, 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 miss. People don't want to kill each other. As much as like we kind of say we do, there are some psychopaths out there, but there are a lot of people out there who will literally, like, there has to be like a dehumanization aspect to really get people over that hurdle of killing another human. We have to fool ourselves into believing they're somehow less than us. Because if we see another person the same as us on the other end of that rifle, it's a lot harder for us to pull the trigger.
yeah. Yeah, I
And
mean,
I think that is a huge gateway to fixing a lot of this is changing the way that we look at each other.
the trouble is there's so many political actors that benefit from this process, from the dehumanization. Those who practice
Well,
dehumanization
we'll
do a lot
dehumanize
better.
them instead. How about that?
That's how it starts. That's how it starts.
I'm
You say
just kidding. I'm
this
just kidding.
group, we're humans. That group's not humans. Yeah. Uh, it's just so frustrating to me. Forces that focus on dehumanization above everything else seem to be winning elections everywhere. Seem to be winning power everywhere. It's not that that's something that was ever wasn't true. It's just that it's become increasingly obvious to politicians that it's a much better way of achieving your goals than actually solving problems and actually having policies.
Well, not to tangent off of this too much, I think a lot of it's this first past the post stuff to where you end up with a situation where have you ever heard of pivotal vote theory? Okay, so you can see this pretty clearly in Israeli politics. It's the idea that like if you have a democracy, it's not really about what the majority want. It's about what the person who swings wants. You see what I'm saying? It's about the guy who makes you just have the majority and what he wants, and
It's
he's
kind of
the
like a
guy that makes
marriage.
the
If
decision.
one of the couples decides that you're swinging, then that's the pivotal element in the marriage.
Well, like or like I said, Israeli politics. So we don't go too off the rails here. But like,
Yeah.
if you look at like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, that's why they have so much power in Israeli politics. It's because they are the pivotal vote. If they leave, he loses his government. So, in effect, they basically control the government. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? And so this is what's going on in a lot of these cases. And then there's also the first past the post problem of we're not really voting for who we want. And I guarantee you, if you think about it hard, you're not. You haven't voted probably in your life for a candidate that you wanted to win. You voted for candidates that you wanted the other guy to lose.
Every now
And
and
the
then I
thing
thought
about
I
it
thought I
is
wanted someone to win.
when you realize how much of the parties are controlled from the top and from the money and from the things like that, then you'll start to realize that it's way easier to control who you vote against than who you vote for.
Yeah.
And then things start to make a little bit more sense. You know what I mean? Like that deal to segue back here, the deal that was just offered with Trump, Hamas, and Israel right now was offered to Netanyahu and Biden, and they both declined it. This exact deal.
No, Biden didn't decline it. Biden more or less put it
Yeah,
forth.
basically didn't agree with it. No, he completely ignored it. Go look into it. I'm not kidding. It was completely just ignored off of his desk. He was like, "Nah, they're continuing the war. There's nothing we can do.
Well,
Keep giving them weapons." But the point of the matter is like people will say that like Harris would have been different. I'm like, I don't think she would have. I really don't. I think honestly, you might actually have a case that Trump is actually different in that if he gets pissed off enough from his ego, he might buck Netanyahu. Because
well,
he'll be like, fuck the donors, fuck the, like he's that guy. But I don't see Harris as doing that. I see Harris as playing the politics game, keeping the donors in line the same way Biden was, the same way Obama was, the same way, I really do. That's what I see out of those people. Because, like I said, I don't see any real difference. I see them all as a bunch of corporate controlled guys, whereas I see Trump as more of an ego controlled guy. So, like I said, the second he feels like Netanyahu's playing him, it's going to start blowing up. And I think that's what's going on right now. That's
yeah,
what's going on with Qatar. That's what's going on with this. The second he thought Netanyahu was playing him, this started to blow up.
and the other element is that Netanyahu can't say no to Trump.
That's
He
kind of my
can't.
point.
Yeah, he can't. He can't say to his base, "I'm fighting Trump, the terrible anti-Semite," the way he can about Democrats. He's always been able to do that with
Mm-hmm.
Democrats. He can't do that with Trump.
Kind of
That
like the whole like it took Reagan to make peace with Russia. You kind of need a Republican to do the Israel thing. I think there's a truth to that too. It can't be a Democrat. It can't be some one of those wishy-washy lefties. It's got to be a strong Republican that ended. You know what I mean? There's something
like
to that.
I hear that a lot. Although the Egypt piece was with Jimmy Carter. Oslo was with Clinton. Not every
Neither one of those
Israeli.
stuck. Well,
Yeah,
the good
well, Egypt
the
stuck.
Egypt kind of stuck, but then they had to do several other agreements, and they
Well,
keep giving them. It's kind of a bribery situation. We'll give you
you're
both a
not
bunch
going to
of money if you
find
don't go to war.
anything that the Republicans did that stuck more than Egypt. This ceasefire that you're talking about right now may not last through the
Russia.
month. No, I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about Israel.
Well, no, that's kind of what I'm not even necessarily. Don't get me wrong. I'm not even saying that. It's like Russia was a good example because the left is all communists, so they can't go over there and make the deal. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
getting at with
I know.
this is
I
it's
know.
more on the like those guys are basically Hamas anyway, so they can't go over there and make the deal. It's got to be, you know what I mean? This they've kind of backed the rhetoric into a situation, if that makes sense. Kind of like you almost need a Republican to be the one that ends, the forever wars, if that makes sense, because it's like it was a Republican that started it. It can't be
But it was
some
Biden who
soft.
ended Afghanistan. Your theory doesn't
Yeah.
work very well. Yeah.
Well, technically, it was Trump who ended Afghanistan, and he followed
Yeah.
the deal that was already made.
Trump wasn't willing.
But I
He had to
do,
take the
I
hit.
do. Let me make this point. I do give him credit for actually doing it because there was a lot of pressure to not do it.
You at the end of the day, it's a question of whether you're willing to take that political hit at the end, right?
Agreed. And like
And
no, like
Biden
I
was.
said, and
And
I gave people shit for going after him for it, and they were like, "Well, he didn't do it right," or this, and I was like, "No, look, dude. There is like any way you come out of a war, it's gonna be messy.
yeah,
Period.
I
Any way you come out of a war, it's gonna be messy.
what happened to Biden with Afghanistan was such a blow for the whole anti-war cause because it really showed you that you should never end a war. It's much more profitable to just let a war go on forever. I'm sure
That's why I
Netanyahu
fought
was
it so
taking
bad. I
notes.
was like, no, no, no. Whatever happens, let it do it. No, no, dude.
It vindicated, your Nixons and your LBJs. I have my LBJ T-shirt on, by the way. Who said well, you can't pull out of the war because the cost will be too
I
great.
went all the way fascist with Daleks.
Interesting
Exterminate.
choices we have here today. Yeah, that would. The flack that Biden get. I mean, you could make a case that that's what destroyed Biden's presidency. I think it's a good case. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, and It teaches you that if you keep wars going and hatred going, it's much better electorally, and that's something that politicians take to heart. It's very
Yeah.
unfortunate. A lot of people
And like
who
I
love
said,
peace
I
did
don't
that.
want anything to get misconstrued. I'm not a Trump or a Biden fan. Like I said, I'm a libertarian, so I hate everybody. I think they're all fucking pieces of shit.
If you hate wars, and you're very honest, so I'm definitely not talking about you. If you hate wars, you have to support anyone who ends a war in that policy. Doesn't mean you have to vote for them.
Right. Right.
Let's
I
not get
support
crazy
that.
here.
I
Yeah,
don't there
you have to
that's a
vote for
lot of
them.
what it
You have to
is for
support
me
that
is I
policy.
generally don't support politicians. There's a handful. I fucking love Thomas Massey. He's been raising a lot of hell about the Epstein files lately. He's been raising a lot of hell about Gaza, the wars, the money that we're spending. That's the guy that I would say would be most, you know, I could actually say I support this politician. Most everybody else, it's like, well, no, I like that thing that they did there, or I like that thing that they did there. And like I said, ending the war between Trump, and this is kind of why I say it's like I want to give credit to both ends of this, because Trump went over there and sat down with the Taliban and took a lot of flack for doing so from the left. And that's kind of another big point. They were like, what is he doing talking and negotiating with the Taliban? It's like you have to negotiate with the other side of a war to end a war. That's how it works.
Although in the end, the agreements didn't help much. It was
I'm
mostly
not
just
making that point. I'm making the
unilaterally
point
withdrawn.
that like
But
the
yeah, I
point I
understand
was
what you're saying.
making is that
Yeah,
well, like the U.S. didn't keep their agreement either
true.
because the moving the date to September 11th actually broke the agreement because the agreement was that it was supposed to be, I can't remember what the date was, but it was well before. So the point of the matter I'm making is the deal was made, and when it was moved to September 11th, I was having a heart attack because I was like, they're going to talk him out of it. You know what I'm saying? They're going to try to talk him out of it. And he's trying to buy time so he can get talked out of it. But then he went ahead and followed through, and I gave him credit for it. And I think that's a little bit of why it was kind of that quote unquote rushed, where they didn't do it in the right order and things like that. I think that's what it was because they were talking it out and they weren't successful in convincing him, which is
Yeah,
beautiful. And then he tried to do everything last minute instead of that time should have been used to plan the actual withdrawal.
the best thing about
And or the people who wanted to stay helped botch the fucking thing, because you got to think it's not like there's a lot of people between Biden and the troops in Afghanistan, and like you saw that with Syria under Trump, where they were like he was like pull all these guys out of Syria, and they were like we left them in Syria. You know what I mean? Like it's stuff like that. Like this stuff isn't as ironclad as people think it is. Like there's just an order, and then everybody's like yes sir, and goes and does it. But to the Gaza plan, um, so details wise, how do you feel about the details of the plan, or how much do you know about the details of the plan exactly?
deal. Yeah, I follow it all very closely. There's not all that much to follow in terms of what's actually been agreed on. Once again, we're talking about a deal in stages, which
I'll
what
put up the lines too. I'll find a picture of the lines and put it up as a little
yeah,
square somewhere
yeah,
here,
the
so
the,
that
the
way we can see.
temporary lines, yeah.
So you can talk
So
about those as well.
you have a deal in stages, and at one point the whole deal in stages concept had been abandoned, but they went back to it, and they went back to it for a reason. Um, this everything that's in stage two is basically something that they can't agree on. It's it's something that the sides absolutely can't agree on. Everything in phase one are the things that they could agree on. So what that meant was the release of the hostages, the release of the prisoners. Many of the prisoners, so called, that the Palestinians are actually hostages, and it meant the
We'll
withdrawal
talk
of.
about that too.
We'll talk about that. It meant the withdrawal of the IDF to lines you're going to show, which still have the IDF controlling over 50% of Gaza, but most of the population is now controlled by Hamas. So that's a very big difference. So those are the things that were agreed on in phase one. And the opening of the Rafah crossing and the entry of aid to a much higher level. Those things were all agreed on. And then the return of the dead bodies is something that was left a bit vague because Hamas said that they would return the dead bodies, but they also said there were ones that they couldn't find. And that's one of the reasons the ceasefire is on the verge of collapse as we speak. But
Which
my guess
makes
is that,
sense. I mean, if you're bombing Gaza and Hamas is in said building and they leave and there's a guy that was trapped in the building, they're not going back for him. They're not going to dig him out. And then if that guy gets killed, they don't know where he is.
yes, I can tell
So,
you
like,
what
yeah,
Israeli sources have told me recently and a long time ago is the following. Hostages were scattered all over Gaza. There were a few groups of 4, 5, 6, but mostly it was 1 or 2. And they were given to all these different cells. They weren't all
right.
Hamas. Some of them were not taken by Hamas. They were taken by other groups. They were the ones who went
I
into
didn't know that,
Israel
yeah.
and they took them.
Because the
In
fence
other
was
cases,
down, and so other people went through. Yep.
right. And the operation included Islamic Jihad and people who were not affiliated with any terror organization and
Yeah.
all
Just people who rushed
PSO.
the fence, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and people just took hostages at random. There was an order to take hostages, but it wasn't a very organized, plan.
I
So
was just
people
having
came
this
back with
conversation with
hostages.
my cousin about how much of a cluster, like, people think of this one attack when in reality, I was like, it's better to think of it as like a bunch of attacks that happened in one day.
So it's actually 3 days, but of course the vast majority was on October 7th. For 3 days, there were uh, battles around that area, and there were people entering still on the 8th. Probably people still entering on the 9th too.
I didn't
They were
even know that
definitely, yeah,
actually.
they were definitely fighting on the 9th. Yeah, it was a whole mess, but 7th was most of the damage. But by the 8th or the
Right.
9th, I wouldn't say the IDF had it under control, but at least they were, around.
Yeah, they were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, and then also some of the other groups demanded that they be given hostages, and they were given a few that Hamas had. So, long story short, they were all over the place. At first, there was a lot of communication between Hamas cells and between Hamas and the other organizations. And even when someone died, they knew where they died, they had the bodies and so on. But at a certain point, the IDF policy became to completely disintegrate communications of
Right.
Hamas intentionally. That was a few months into the war, maybe 4 months into the war.
I was about to say they knocked out like internet and mobile stuff and all that.
And assassinated
Pretty.
the people who were moving the messages around and blowing up the main tunnel arteries and all that. Hamas lost touch with some of its own cells and with some of the other cells that had hostages. And then sometimes they regained communication. Sometimes they found their corpses, and sometimes they didn't. And Israel knows that very well. They know that very well. They knew it to the point where they knew the fate of most of the hostages. There weren't too many surprises by the time this deal was signed. There were one or two, there's Tamir Nimrodi and a couple of others who they weren't 100% sure about, but basically they knew what happened to everyone. And now the argument between the IDF and Hamas is over 2 or 3 people that the IDF thinks that Hamas knows where they are, and they think that Hamas is holding out on them. It's not even clear if they're holding out on that. The government is pretending, the Israeli government is pretending that there's all these people that Hamas has and is holding for leverage, but they're not. And they know that they're not. There could be 1 or 2. I don't know about that either, because how much sense does it make to release all of the living hostages that make up the vast majority of the leverage and
Right.
then have a ceasefire break over a couple of dead bodies? What are you going to do with those dead bodies that's worth it? It makes no
Right.
sense from a rational perspective. It's true that Hamas are an evil organization, by the way,
Oh yeah.
and they
Yeah.
they love to screw with the minds of the families. And so some people say they're doing it for that, and I don't think that that's important enough for them to blow the ceasefire over. They've done that
Right.
plenty, and they do that for fun almost, but I don't think that's important enough. I'm not buying it, any of that. I think that Hamas took a massive gamble on releasing the hostages without sufficient
Oh
guarantees,
yeah.
and they made a big mistake from their perspective. Don't get me wrong; I'm glad they did, because I'm
Right.
very happy that the hostages are home. But
Because
from
that
their
was kind of a
perspective,
question that I had
yeah,
about that was, given the situation in Lebanon right now that they're supposed to be under ceasefire and they've been bombed the entire time. It's like we're looking at like 1,700 ceasefire violations, the attack on Qatar, the attack in Iran while they were discussing, a deal.
much
At
more
a
close
certain
to home.
point,
the first ceasefire, not the first, the second ceasefire, Israel had guaranteed that they would go from phase 1 to phase 2, and they broke it. They broke it between phase 1 and phase
But
2. So
that's what I'm
Hamas should
saying.
know it
You
personally.
have all these,
No, but they don't even have to go
and
to
this isn't.
Lebanon.
Let me make another big point too
Yeah.
here as well. Hamas is not innocent on the breaking of deals
Oh,
here,
no.
because they've broken several deals too. So it's just kind of one of those things that, like, I hear a lot of people making the point of like, why isn't all these people celebrating that this is over now? And I'm like, well, as you said, we've had one before that fell apart. It's only been a few days. You know what I mean? It's just like both sides of this deal, I don't really feel I can trust to hold to the deal.
Well, no, you can't
Does that
trust
make sense?
anyone. It makes perfect sense. You can't trust anyone. Hamas have a lot more of an interest for the deal to work,
Right.
for the simple reason that they're getting their asses whooped militarily. So
Because I honestly thought that those hostages were dead when they hit Qatar. Like, I really did. I thought that they were just like, what's the point in keeping them alive at this point? There is no leverage. They won't negotiate. That's what I thought you know what I mean? That's what I thought the response was going to be.
yeah, I have no.
I'm glad it
That's
isn't. I'm
that's
so
the
glad it
leverage they
wasn't.
have. Yeah. No,
So
I
glad
didn't
that
think
it wasn't, but
I didn't think so. Where I was
I
wrong.
agree with you. It's the leverage, but the
Yeah.
point is like it's kind of like if you have a hostage situation at a bank or something, and you tell the bank robbers like, "I'm not giving you a damn thing that you're asking for." You know what I mean? In fact, I'm sending the SWAT team through the doors. He's gonna start executing hostages like that. Like we've seen this. Like it's just kind of one of those things. You at least get the helicopter parked outside, and you come on, man. Like you know what I mean? You have to negotiate.
Yeah. But that's the thing. In the Middle East, we know in the Middle East that eventually you have to talk. No matter how many people you kill, eventually you have to talk. But we also know that no matter how much you talk, eventually you have to kill people. It's an endless cycle. So you don't kill a hostage. People were talking a lot about Hamas executing hostages. You don't kill a hostage unless you have a very good reason to. They're worth a lot.
Right, and that's what I was saying. The only that would be the only situation I would have seen them doing it is them seeing negotiation as not possible, and that's why I was saying that Qatar strike really worried me because it was an attack on the negotiation arm of Hamas. So it was literally saying we are not going to negotiate with you.
Yeah.
Is
Well, I
like
think
the
they
loud and
immediately
clear
saw
message that I was hearing.
that is the message that Netanyahu was trying to send. You're absolutely right, but that's not the message that Hamas received. The message Hamas received was from Qatar, from the United States, from Egypt, was Israel went too far. Israel went too far, and now we have to push them back into line. And they started thinking maybe this will rebound in our favor, and in a way it did. Not as much as maybe they
Yeah.
wanted, but in a
Because
way
like I
it
said, I
did.
think that played into they're playing me, and like I said again, another reason why I feel like that's becoming Trump's outlook here is also this whole like the dead hostages that they're trying to get back, because the Israeli government was posturing to go, hey, this deal is about to blow up because we're not getting our guys, and then Trump comes out and is like, we already knew that was going to be the case. They started posturing up when Hamas started policing. Um, and Trump said,
Traditionally
"Hey, we already
persecuting
told him."
dissidents. Let's just call it
Yeah,
what it is. Why, I don't use euphemisms for Israel and I don't
mm,
use euphemisms for Hamas.
I
They're
don't either. That's why I put the
yeah,
giant quotes there. I was
yeah,
like,
I know,
yeah,
I know.
I wonder the question, the reason why I honestly would be any kind of hesitant to go too hard is I wonder how many of those people are the people. What was their name? It was at Abu Shabab that was raiding the aid.
Yes,
And
some of them are.
I'm not necessarily saying that I'm for extrajudicial stuff, but I will say I'm not necessarily opposed to those guys losing their life either.
I
Because, like I said, they were raiding aid of starving people.
I
You know what I mean?
think everyone deserves their day in court. I know that's very naive to
Agreed.
say
That's
about
why I said
Hamas.
extrajudicial.
Yeah, very naive to say about Hamas that they deserve their day in court, but they do. And they're not all from that militia. A lot of them
Right.
are.
And I doubt it.
A lot of them
I
are from
doubt it.
a lot of them are no, this isn't even something that they're denying. A lot of them are from a clan that Hamas doesn't like for reasons that are not even completely clear. There's a clan that
Somalia type stuff.
yeah, there's a clan that didn't cooperate with Israel, but did sort of assert their own, you know, area of control, which makes sense because there was chaos. And I think they might have killed a Hamas member by accident, and it turned into a blood feud. And they're killing a lot of people from this clan, including innocent people. And they're
That's
killing
messed up.
some children of leaders of the clan
And I've
and from
seen
the
some
militia.
torture as well, which is really
Torture.
fucked up. Like throwing like a giant rock at this dude while he was sitting there with a and breaking his leg. I was like,
And
oh
they're
my
killing
god.
people who are rumored to have been collaborators with Israel without proof. And they're killing people who they consider to be dissidents, who maybe support the Palestinian Authority or maybe were posting things against Hamas. So they're killing all sorts of people, some of whom, because there's no trial, are innocent, and some of whom what they're guilty of are things that, as Western liberal people, in the
Right.
larger sense of liberal, would not consider to be offenses to begin with, like being against terrible regime. So it's very important not
Even if it
to.
was a good regime, we're liberals. You can be against the good one.
Absolutely, absolutely, not that different from what Israel did. Why? What did Israel do? Israel took a whole bunch of people from Gaza. A lot of them were terrorists. A lot of them they suspected to be terrorists, and some of them they just took for kicks. And then they tortured them and killed some of them. It's very similar. You cast a wide net. Some of it's just to satisfy your followers. Some of it's to terrify the enemy. Some of it's just because you're sadistic, insane terrorists in both cases, because we're talking about Itamar Ben-Gvir on one side, and we're talking about Hamas on the other. And it's actually very similar. And the only reason there's not judicial killings in the traditional sense in Israeli prisons is because there's still a court system in Israel, very tenuous, but there still is one. I can tell you that what they're doing in Israeli prisons instead is pushing people to the point where they're dying often through torture and physical humiliation without, very rarely, not never, executing them. So there's a lot of people who are tortured to death. And then, by the way, this also I know from first-hand testimonies. Also, the corpses were sometimes kept with the other prisoners to keep them in line. They were rotting next to the other prisoners. So
That's horrifying.
basically, you have the same shit going on both sides right now, just the worst atrocities. And it's very important that that people not just say about Hamas, "Oh, it's fine." That's what can you expect when you had a war like this? On some level, of course, this happens, but it absolutely should not be normalized. And it's important to remember that Hamas, when they were in charge in a stable regime, they were still doing this, just not in these numbers, because now they need to reestablish control. So they need to use more violence. But they were doing this
Yeah.
all the time. They were killing people all the time. You can see horrific videos of things that they did when they were in control.
Oh yeah, I know that. That's why, like I said, I like to make it real clear that I don't think that like Hamas is a good solution to this. I do wonder whether the solution like broader for Palestine would be more of a incorporation than a complete disarmament, if that makes sense. Kind of like what you did with Leahy and Haganah and Ergun and just like we're going to make a small military and then we're going to incorporate them and you know exposure therapy, liberalize them basically.
You would look. You really need the
That's what they did in Ukraine too with Azov. It's not a new concept.
the technical details are not that hard to work out of how you would make peace. It's really the conceptual bridge that you need to cross. The idea that one side doesn't have to be completely supreme over the other is one that's almost alien to politics there. And I mean on both
Yeah,
on both sides.
I agree. Yeah, I do agree.
It's very hard to persuade someone on either side that they need to really share the pie. And the details of what you would do, which I agree with you, are very important. Are almost incidental to that. I I think the best
Because
way
I
to go
just see that
forward.
as one of the sticking points too with the deal because they're talking about like that they're demanding that Hamas disarm. And like I said, it's like I'm not again. Obviously, neither one of us have defended Hamas as an organization itself, but there is something to like Hamas is really the only fighters that have any sort of actual fighting experience or anything like that and have any trust at all from the Palestinians themselves to try to defend them, even though it's not much. But I'm just saying, like, there
Yeah, but
is something to, like, how do you know, what is the plan? We're going to disarm Hamas, and then there's just nobody to. And then, like, even still, what is the plan? Like, how do you know you've disarmed Hamas?
yes, and
You know what I mean? Like,
it feels
it's
very
not like they have an
unjust.
official roster.
Yeah, official 2025-26 Hamas roster at point guard. Yeah, so it also feels very unjust that you're disarming Hamas without disarming the IDF. The IDF is exponentially caused more harm than Hamas, and not only are they not being disarmed, but they're going to be given more and more contracts to expand
And
their
that's kind
military
of what I'm
hardware.
saying is, like,
Yeah,
yeah, like, the solution after, like, World War II, like, it's kind of like one of those things. It's like at a certain point we should learn this lesson, because I mean, again, you don't have to go that far to find it, you know, or World War I is what I mean, but
yeah,
you don't have to go that far to find it. But because you can see that, like, over and over and over and over, if you keep making these deals where the Palestinians are just the shit on ones, they're eventually going to break over that fence and come try to fuck up some Israelis. That's what's going to happen. And, like, that was a lesson of Versailles that we say about World War I, was we made this Treaty of Versailles with Germany, and it meant that Germany couldn't have a military. It meant that Germany had to pay all these reparations. It meant that Germany had to do this. It was all a consequence of losing this war. And that is what drove a lot of hatred towards the rest of the world in Germany that led to the election of Hitler.
absolutely.
So, like, you have to understand that, like, if you look at Palestine and you look at the public sentiments, right, and you go and you do polling when there's a peace deal on the table, the support for Hamas is drops like a rock. But when you see that there is no peace on the table, that's when the support for Hamas flies up. And you see the same thing in Israel for the far right versus the left of Israel. When the peace deal's on the table, you know, the left rises. When there is no peace deal on the table, it falls. This is part of the reason why Netanyahu has been able to hold on to power, I think, for so long, was because he's been able to keep that peace deal off the table
And keep
and hold
Hamas in
on to that
power.
right wing
And
and
keep
hold
Hamas
that
in
right
power.
wing. Yep. And hold that right wing strong on both ends.
Yeah, because
So,
no one knows better than Netanyahu how you would advance towards peace. You have two alternate governments for the Palestinians, as I'm sure everyone who's watching this knows. You have the Palestinian Authority and you have Hamas. And every time you give diplomatic concessions to one of those sides, you're strengthening them. You're showing them these are the guys who can make Israel make concessions. The side that always gets Israel's concessions every single time is Hamas. Hamas always ends up at the negotiating table, not directly, because, of course not, but always ends up getting hostages, always ends up getting ceasefires, always ends up getting the aid. The Palestinian Authority gets nothing. Israel always humiliates them and cuts off their money and sanctions them. And the PA keeps trying non-military diplomatic goals, and the Hamas keeps using terrorism. And the terrorism keeps getting more results. The terrorism keeps getting more results, at least partially because Israel makes sure that the terrorism gets more results. Because terrorism also keeps the Israeli right in power and also makes sure that they have an excuse to never have a Palestinian state. And these are things that it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but these are things that Israeli politicians admit to. Bezalel Smotrich, who's one of the dumber ones who has power, has admitted that on several occasions. He said Hamas is an asset to us because it stops a Palestinian state. And we've heard recordings of Netanyahu saying, behind closed doors, the division of the Palestinians into Palestinian Authority and Hamas serves us very well. It prevents a Palestinian.
well, they got him. I want to say they were saying that this is completely unconfirmed. It's behind closed doors and all this. And I was like, well, it's Likud minutes from a Likud party member reporting it. But okay, your own party's lying on you. But anyway, it was like, but okay, how about this Shin Bet recording where you're being interviewed about your corruption and you're explaining it to Shin Bet? How about that? So they do have him on tape saying exactly that,
Oh, yeah.
that's the reason why, so, like, yeah, like, the thing about it is that I think is interesting about that whole situation is, like I said, it's like, to me, you can have conversations with like hardcore pro-Zionists, and you'll be like, "Hey, man, like these people are acting this way because of how they're being treated." And all of this, and they'll be like, no, 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 you don't understand. Palestinians are just like that. That's just the way they are. And then, like, minutes later in the conversation, they'll be like, no, we're not racist. We got Arabs in the country. They get the same rights as us. And they're, it's like, yeah, and how peaceful are they?
Very good point.
As a
They're good
whole,
citizens. Yeah.
quite peaceful. The point of the matter here is like, people will be like, well, there was this one guy or this guy or that guy. I was like, right. And that happens in America where you have random criminals. It also happened in America when you had, lighter discrimination than, what you have now, like a little further past Jim Crow, not Jim Crow, but, a little further. And you had attacks and, responses from said stuff. So, like I said, I don't think that the way that Arabs are treated in Israel is perfect, but you can see that people being treated better of the same ethnicity and genetics aren't evil, scary terrorists. So that's kind of why I say it's like the solution here seems quite obvious.
Well, the look, the psychological they know this. They know what you're saying. The psychological barrier is the fear of what happens when Jews are not the majority in the country anymore, when it's not a Jewish state. Is a very
Yeah, I
serious
think it's the
psychological.
Thomas Jefferson quote. Have you ever heard the Thomas Jefferson's quote where he says, "We have the tiger by the tail, and we can
Yeah,
neither afford to let it go, neither hold on to it." And he's
right.
talking about freeing the slaves,
Jefferson and
because he's
slavery. Yeah,
basically saying, like, what happens when we free these slaves? Do you think they're just going to be okay with this? They're like, "Oh yeah, thanks for freeing me, guy. We're best friends now."
but they were. I mean, as much as you possibly could be, as much as you possibly
Yeah,
could
it
be like
seems
that, they were.
counterintuitive that that's actually
Yeah,
how it's going to go,
yeah.
but
The
it
people
is
who are
kind of
really
how it went.
angry, the people who were really angry and wanted vengeance were the white people. Were the white people who came back and created Jim Crow. And there's a lesson there. The same thing happened in South Africa. There was this fear of what the black people do to the white people. It never happened. It did happen in Rhodesia, by the way, to some extent. So it's not like it can't happen, but it very often does not
Right.
happen. And yeah, I know Israelis have agency
That's
here.
why your best guess to do it is while you have the power.
It's while you have the
Don't
power
don't
and
kick the can down the road.
absolutely. While you have the power and in a respectful and humane way, where you're creating some goodwill. That's a, I think what Israelis are missing. There's a lot of things Israelis are missing, but one thing that Israelis are missing is that they're not going to have control of this process forever. The
Yes.
long-term demographic and economic trends are against Israel, and
You got
one
10
day they're
years max.
I don't know. It could be longer, but the long-term trends are the long-term trends. The technological advantage and economic advantage are going to go as certain demographics get larger and more educated people leave, and as there's more sanctions on Israel, less acceptance from the world. It's a process that's undergoing, right? The United States is on the verge. It really feels like completely turning on Israel. Other countries are on the verge of completely turning on Israel. That will
It's like 75-25 for young Republicans.
I know it's unbelievable.
That's kind of my point. Is like a
Yeah.
lot of people point to like these demographics, like groups, and they'll be like, the young people are moving from this idea to this. No, it's people are growing up and they're moving to a different demographic range. That's what's going on. So that 18 to 35 is going to move up and move up and move up, and those boomers are going to die. And
Yeah.
like I said, the support for Israel is literally dying off.
Yeah. First of all, I think a lot of older people are sick of Israel's shit too. But younger people don't even they don't have
They don't have
this.
the preconceived
Yeah,
notions.
they don't have the myth to hang on to. I grew up with all these myths. I grew up in the myth, and they don't have that. They just see the evil that Israel is committing now, and yeah. So that means that Israel's not going to have control over the situation, and so that's why I support. I mean, there's also the moral reason, which is even more important. But from a strategic perspective, doing it while you still have control over the situation. But they're not going to do it. They're not going to do shit.
Right.
Let's be honest.
I feel like that's kind of that's my point that I've said is like honestly, and because like I said, I don't support one people over the other people. I don't care about the stupid states, but I care about the people. And to me, if you keep playing this game, this is a headed for disaster for the Jewish people for sure. Like you're going to see like if you don't do this while you have the power to manage it, it's not going to be done in a way that is going to be good for Jews.
Yeah.
It really
Or
is not.
anyone,
It's
when you take
well, whenever you take any group away from the grand scheme of humanity, it's bad for everybody, man. We all invent dope stuff. We feed each other. We grow stuff.
no, but
We
let's
all
look at
need
it
each
just from a
other. But I'm just
Palestinian
saying,
perspective. Let's look at it from a Palestinian perspective. The longer they have to fight against Israel, the more extreme and violent they will get. And we already talked about the process by which
right?
Israel rewards the violence, right? So they get more violent because that's what the system rewards. And then by the time they take over, they can be a truly toxic and violent society to itself. And how many
That's
times have we
basically what
seen?
I'm getting at.
Oh, I know we agree on all this stuff. Um, uh, how many times have we seen a violent organization take over a country and run it into the ground? They don't know how to run a country. They know how to kill people. That's what happens when you keep rewarding killers. The Palestinians are going to end up having won through violence, not through negotiation, not through state building, and the results will be seen. I mentioned Rhodesia already as a case. I wrote my master's about Rhodesia. So they didn't even have guerrillas or militia groups until the 60s. But by the time they won independence, their whole society had been militarized. And they ended up with a terrible dictatorship there. And now it's one of the poorest, most corrupt countries in Africa. They even threw out all the white people, which caused their economy to almost collapse in Zimbabwe. So the way that you make peace really matters. In South Africa, they did it mostly diplomatically. There was plenty of violence, but there wasn't a war. The ANC didn't go to war against the apartheid regime. And that's one of the reasons there was a process of state building. There was a process of reconciliation. Very problematic. South Africa is a very problematic country. But a bunch of killers didn't take over the country. Nelson Mandela took over the country. So it's
This
fair
is
for
something
everyone.
that like a lot of the more purist left gets mad at me when I'm trying to explain that like sometimes you have to make the deal that you can make today. It's like, well, look at like the history of the country, and it's just like, first of all, like you do realize the reason we have a Bill of Rights and the reason we have a Constitution was because they were basically like, trust. Okay, I know you guys don't want a government, but how about we only do this? You know what I'm saying? It was literally that. Like, and then if you go and you look at like why did they have an anti-slavery amendment in the beginning? That's why. Because several states would have been like, "Nah, not happening." You know what I'm saying? So there is a lot of it. It's like I agree with you. It'd have been better if we founded this country and never had slavery, not a day in the existence of this country. But you have to also realize that without the existence of this country, there isn't a country to abolish slavery in.
Well, I mean, you would have had the British Empire, and they did abolish slavery. I'm not sure about this argument.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying.
The
I'm not
British
saying
abolished
that we would have
slavery.
never,
They would have
I wouldn't
abolished it
have
in the
never,
U.S. too,
that's not at
eventually.
all what I'm getting at here. The point I'm getting at is more on there's a lot of these things too. Here, let me use the three-fifths compromise. It's an easier one to illustrate what I'm making, the point I'm making. The three-fifths compromise, right? Was it's actually misinterpreted heavily in the history because the people who are arguing for the slaves to not be counted were the abolitionists. And a lot of people don't know that. They're like, well, they wanted black people counted, not they didn't want people counted as a person. No, the slaveholders wanted them counted as a person for purposes of representation, which
Exactly.
gave them more power in the government based on the slaves who had no representation. So they were going to use those numbers to give them power in the government. If you would have counted those people as whole people from the beginning of this country, slavery probably would have existed in this country for at least another 100 years.
Yeah, they wanted, if it
So
was up to them, they would have had slaves count as two people as long as they couldn't vote. You know.
and this is something that's like, why is this important also to know? Current, I know I'm ADD as hell right now, but why is that currently important? Because they do it currently with prisons. They put people who can't vote in this prison. This prison creates a district, and now these 8 people have the power of one whole district because there's a prison in that area. They do it currently, and I've actually long advocated that we should change it to you only count voters.
Or
If they're not eligible to vote, you don't count them
if you
for
ask me,
purposes
not
of
that anyone
representation.
does, I think that you should let prisoners vote.
Well, yeah, but
They're
that's
affected by
the
the
reason
system
I
more
want
than
to
anyone.
say that. The reason why I want to say you only count voters is because it forces that issue. It's like, okay, you want to count immigrants, then let them vote. Okay, you want to count prisoners, let them vote.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You only count voters, and we should have a hell of a
Only
lot more
count
voters.
voters.
Yeah, you should have a hell of a lot more voters. I really think it's awful that that prisoners can't vote because it incentivizes putting certain people we don't want to vote in jail. That's you know, if there's a community that doesn't vote for you, and then it's very good for you to put them in jail. That's not an incentive you want a politician to have.
Hey, quit citing Nixon in the war on drugs.
There you go. There you go.
We got to get rid of the hippies and the blacks.
The hippies, yes. Hippies, yes. I think if we got rid of
No,
you,
that was a direct quote. Direct quote was the hippies and the
I
blacks.
know.
That's why he went after marijuana so bad.
I know. Yeah. I've studied Nixon. I studied Nixon quite a bit. Good time. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. We have an hour.
Heck yeah.
Let's
Heck yeah.
this was good. Let's
But I feel like we're definitely gonna discuss Gaza a little bit more. As was promised numerous times, I would say Doctors Without Borders is a really good organization, from what I understand, dealing with Gaza. They definitely need a lot of medical treatment, especially now. Some of the food is making its way in. I know they were talking about having the trucks. I don't know how official that is.
Israel's
So
still
they
limiting.
are starting to get
Yeah.
food in. So if you were to give to those organizations, it would help as well. The thing about food that we all have to keep in mind is that like a lot of these people are past the point of just giving them a sandwich. We really do need actual like medical help, and that's why I also would push like a Doctors Without Borders type situation. UNICEF is pretty dope. We gotta make sure that we're getting these people taken care of. There's going to be a lot of help that's going to be needed. We'll be back to talk about Gaza, I'm sure,
Yeah. And next week
even
we'll
if the
also.
war is done.
The war is not done. I promise you.
Yeah, even if the war is done, we're still going to have to come back and talk
And
about like
another thing that
the
we're going to be
rebuilding and stuff.
following closely is Sudan. In Sudan, let's discuss this briefly. There wasn't a push to get a ceasefire over there. It failed. The RSF is not cooperating. Sudanese government also is not cooperating, but also the RSF. But there is a sort of a good development there, which is that the Sudanese military seems to be winning. While the RSF is taking over almost all of Darfur. They have El Fasher there in a stranglehold in a siege, but everywhere else the Sudanese army is winning, and it looks like in a few weeks the Sudanese army is going to be able to enter Darfur from the north.
Yeah, I've heard that they've been talking about splitting it up again.
Yeah, well, I don't think that I
I
don't
don't
think
think
that's going
that's
to happen.
necessarily the solution, though.
The Sudanese seem to believe that they can win this war, and as we know, wars don't end until both sides feel like they can't accomplish much militarily. That's unfortunately
Yeah, if
how
you just
wars
draw a
work.
line, and like you can ask Israel and Palestine,
Yeah.
India and Pakistan, if you just draw a line, it doesn't solve anything.
There's a famous saying in political science that wars start when sides disagree on who's stronger and end when they agree. And right now in Sudan, the lines are moving. The RSF is hoping to take over all of Darfur. The Sudanese are hoping that they'll be able to enter Darfur soon and retake it. So I think that's the major reason that negotiations there have fallen down, because they're hoping to solve it militarily, especially both of them, but especially the Sudanese military. So unfortunately, we can expect a lot more death there as well. And
Man.
South Sudan is on the verge of war as well. We'll be focusing on that too. Unfortunately, and in Congo, it looks like the ceasefire there is breaking down. So I think what we're going to do here, as this show develops, we'll be following all these conflicts and always lobbying and hoping for diplomacy, negotiations, and humanitarian aid.
And peace. At the end of the day, man, we all gotta figure out how to share this rock.
Indeed. All right, my friend. Always a pleasure. Yeah, so we're gonna do this
Always,
every
yeah.
week from now on. This is fun, and
Heck yeah, man.
see you guys soon.
We'll see you next week.